Okay, before I dive into this one, just a little bit of housekeeping. The first up, if you missed my podcast of Quid Prog Quo, you can find it on its new home of the Prog Report. The first episode is currently live. Roy and I from the Prog Report have a lot of fun talking about our two records. So if you want to check that out, I've left that video right up there. Go and show them some love. Let them know that note sent you. And secondly, just want to remind everybody of my memberships here on the channel. I've been recording a lot of videos lately, and I've been kind of scheduling them so you don't get dumped with them all at once. But if you're the kind of person that, I'm not going to say that, but if you're the kind of person that likes to binge all the videos all at once, become a member. I left the link down below to become a member, and you can watch all those videos early. Yeah, I think that's all in terms of the housekeeping. I want to dive right into the subject matter of this video, which is the Volume 1 and Volume 2 of albums. So this is something that I've been mulling over and wanted to talk about. These are albums that come out as a 2-pack right from the inception of the album with a very clear Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I'm going to be listing 10 of these records, and these are very clearly like a 1-2 punch. And I was trying to think of the best way to talk about these, because it's kind of hard to distill this idea of like, hey, here's Volume 1 or Part 1 or just one of 2 records that are coming out. And for example, as an honorable mention, Use Your Illusion from Guns N' Roses. It came out on the same day. You had Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2. They could have come out on the same day, or they could have come out years apart, like Road Salt from Pain of Salvation. You have Road Salt 1 and Road Salt 2. And they were always meant to be a 2-part album. Look at Joe's Garage from Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa released Joe's Garage Act 1, and then a little bit later on, Act 2 and 3. Albums that don't count, so I'm going to kind of nip you at the butt before I get people down in the comments being like, well, where's this album? And why aren't you talking about that album? We're not talking about any live albums. So we don't have The Way We Walk from Genesis, parts 1 and 2. There's also no EPs or special editions or, collaborations or conglomerations of like demos, right? So you don't have like Roadworks Part 1 or 2, and it's only studio records. We're also not doing albums that came out after the fact as a Part 2. So like Bat Out of Hell is just Bat Out of Hell. Then you have Bat Out of Hell 2 and Bat Out of Hell 3, but it was never intended when they were writing Bat Out of Hell to be a Bat Out of Hell 2. So the first record has to have a Part 1 or something on there. I'm rambling far too much on here. Let's dive in and talk about my top 10 of these types of albums. And I want to get through the honorable mentions first, really quickly. I already said Use Your Illusion and Road Salt. I also want to talk about Keeper of the Seven by Helloween. I'm recording this 2 days before Halloween, and so I've been listening to a lot of Helloween. Love those, but they didn't make it onto the list. Same with The Singularity, Phase 1, Neo-Human, and Phase 2, Xenopath from Scar Symmetry, Time from Winter Sun. Another honorable mention is The Uncrowned King from Evership, Act 1 and 2. I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot of excitement on this. They were kind of a letdown. I was really hoping for, Act 1 was great. I was hungry for more, and Act 2 was a little bit of a letdown. So that's why it didn't really make itself on the list, even though Act 1 was quite good. The final honorable mention that I'm going to say that didn't make it on here was Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Works, Part 1 and Part 2. The only reason why I didn't make it on here is not that great. Works Volume 2 doesn't really have anything on it that I particularly like. I like Tank, and I Believe in Father Christmas. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to write home about. And the first 3 sides off of Works Volume 1 are kind of forgettable. The only thing that I love is Fanfare for a Common Man and Pirates. And that's the only reason to really listen to those albums. So yeah, it didn't make the cut. Sorry, friends. All that being said, let's dive into my top 10 of Volume 1, Volume 2 records from all across the spectrum, but mainly in Prague. Starting with number 10, we've got A Voyage, A Destination from Versa. I've got the review coming, I swear, it's just there's been a lot of music coming, but if you haven't listened to A Voyage, A Destination, both of these records really do go hand in hand. Like they're so fun and so like modern prog. You know, you have that very hungry aspect of an independent artist trying to get their way. They've got a lot of guest stars on these records, and they're just a bundle of joy when it comes to the progressive rock landscape. They're continuing where a lot of the proggers of the past kind of dropped the ball when they came into the 90s and the 2000s to continue that style of progressive rock. So yeah, it's a great time. If you haven't listened to A Voyage Destination from Versa, go ahead and do so. Some really great newer progressive rock. Okay, number 9, we have Hymns for Hungry Spirits from the Great Wide Nothing. Another very small group, you know, not a whole lot of traction, but for those that have heard the Great Wide Nothing, you'll love these records. And I particularly love Volume 2. That Volume 2 big epic at the end, it's what I love for progressive rock. It's got that retro styles that I love. You know, there's a lot of really great deep sounds that I particularly enjoy. And it's just like it's like coming home for a guy that loves progressive rock. So yeah, if you haven't heard Hymns for Hungry Spirits parts 1 or 2, I highly recommend listening to part 2 because part 2 is just so good. At number 8, we have Joseph the Dreamer and Joseph the Restoration from Neil Morse. I know a lot of people weren't all that excited about this, and it is the most recent addition on this list, but there's still quite a bit of great music on here. And I particularly love the more showtimey Broadway style, you know, the musical aspect of Neil Morse discography. And again, I know I'm in the minority in that case, but there's just so, I don't know, dang enjoyable. You know, like I'm a theater kid at heart. I love everything from Andrew Lloyd Webber, Sondheim, you know, the big names. I friggin' adored all those. And I'm surprised more progressive rock lovers don't love show tunes, and kind of vice versa, because there's a lot of overlap. Like the Venn diagram is practically a circle in what I love about progressive rock is also a lot of things that I love about musical theater. I wouldn't necessarily call Joseph the best of his musical theater styles of music. I would actually go to Jesus Christ the Exorcist, but because we released this as Act 1 and Act 2, hey, it found itself on this list. So that's why it's on here, and yeah, I think we can move on. Number 7 comes from Marillion with Happiness is the Road. I have a soft spot in my heart for this. This came out when I very recently moved away from home. I bought the big box set of this record, so it's like in a flip book. My name is in the credits, and I love both of these records. I love how part 1 is just like one piece of music that ends with the title track of Happiness is the Road. But I love that journey of music that's found on album 1. It's almost like an unbroken continuation of music from start to finish. I also love like Essence, the kind of the track that's named after that part 1. It's just such a great oomph. And part 2 has some of the more singled aspects, like The Man from Planet Marzipan and Asylum, Satellite, like the big show-stopping numbers that the band would continue on with Sounds That Can't Be Made, Fear, and 1 Hour Before It's Dark. Both these albums are doing two very different things, but it's kind of because they're packaged together feel like a continuation of sounds. I love that it's got the same flavor, and I'm kind of saddened that this doesn't, I don't know, because they were experimenting so much on this one, it didn't quite land with fans as much as the previous record of like Marbles or the later records like Fear and An Hour Before It's Dark. I'm kind of sad that these albums kind of got lost in the shuffle, but I still return to them quite regularly, both because the singles from album 2 and the journey from album 1. Okay, number 6, we're going to some heavy records. Let's go to War of the Worlds from Michael Romeo. Number 2 was one of my favorite records of last year or the year before because of how menacing it was. He's channeling his main acts from Symphony X, and it's that relentless drive of this power metal expression. I love the story of the War of the Worlds, and there's been a handful of musical interpretations of it. My favorite is still Jeff Wayne, don't get me wrong, but the music that's found on here has that oppression, it has that fear, it has that drive that the original story kind of yields and needs. So yeah, if you're looking for new Symphony X music, as we're waiting for new Symphony X music, you really can't go wrong with War of the Worlds. Again, number 2 is my favorite, but number one still has some really, really tasty moments on it. Okay, number 5 is an album that I think a lot of people wished was a single album, and that is Automata from Between the Buried and Me. Together, Automata 1 and 2 create a single disc, but I kind of like the fact that they chopped it up into the way that it is, because both have a very distinct flavor and a very distinct sound, but they're all Between the Buried and Me, and when you sit down and listen to it from start to finish, it does create a very enjoyable listen from start to finish. I love the ebbs and flows. I love how it kind of meanders, but because it is part 1 and part 2, it does feel a little bit more disjointed than I think the band intended, but it's still a really fun time, and I really recommend it. And again, much like a lot of these parts 1 and 2, I feel like this album has kind of gotten forgotten within the later catalog of Between the Buried and Me. And I actually, hot take, I actually enjoy it more than Coma Eclectic and Colors 2. I don't know, there's something about it that I love. I love a concept album that ends on a happy note, so... Number 4, we go to some deep prog with the Universal Migrator from Ayreon. And one of the things that I love about these part 1 and part 2 records is it allows musicians and artists to hone their craft on one specific area of their music. Very much like how Happiness is the Road from Marillion, where the first one is kind of this big epic suite of music, and the second one allows them to create more digestible chunks. Within Ayreon, with the Universal Migrator, part 1 is very proggy, and it has, some really big prog, like Last Human on Earth, The Druids Turn to Stone. It's got more of the psychedelic approach that he likes to do. It's not as balls to the wall insane, whereas Universal Migrator part 2 is definitely that heavy metal music that Ayreon loves to play with. It's got that drive, it's got that relentless beats, and it just provides for such a beautiful expression of sound where you have both part 1 and part 2 to tell this big story of the Universal Migrator. So yeah, great collection of songs from Ayreon in the Universal Migrator. Now we're coming into the top 3. Number 3 comes from Big Big Train with the English Electric. Talk about a perfect set, a double disc. I love English Electric. When I listen to the English Electric, I actually listen to the full power that combines the two records. And it's not just a combination of like, okay, here's part 1, here's part 2, we put them together. They mix and match the songs so that there's a complete through line, as well as a couple of the singles and EP stuff that wasn't released on either of those two records to provide more of a through line for this. But as it is, I still love English Electric Part 1. That entire record from start to finish is just absolutely brilliant. And English Electric Part 2 has some good moments on there. I love the first track. Some of the other tracks on English Electric Part 2 doesn't quite hold up when you stack them beside everything from English Electric Part 1. But again, that's where the full electric comes in. When you put it into the context of those records, those tracks really do take on a new life. So yeah, in my mind, this is Big Big Train's best work. Nothing really has kind of come close. Maybe Folklore, maybe the Grand Tour, but other than those two records, yeah, English Electric is by far my favorite. All right, coming into number 2, we have Sleeping in Traffic from Beardfish. This was the album that actually started this whole thing because I was sitting down, listening to the new Beardfish record, and then listening to Sleeping in Traffic Part 1 and Part 2. Absolutely love both of those records. Roulette from Sleeping in Traffic Part 1, one of my all-time favorite tracks. Like that oomph, that dun, 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 dun. Absolutely love it. It just draws me into the track lengths, and the entirety of Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 from start to finish is an absolute blast. It's just so good. That title track at the end, the 35-minute epic, one of the best epics of progressive rock, and I just can't help but love it. So yeah, that's why it's number 2. But number one, I'm sure a lot of people are all like, oh, where is this one? Where is this one? It's Himlay Backen from Moon Safari. Part 1, I still enjoy. Like, there are moments on that one, like Mega Moon, that I absolutely love, but it's part 2 that really sweeps this whole thing for me. Like, these two records are like over 10 years apart, and yet they still feel fresh and they still feel linked. And they're just I don't know. It's everything that I love about progressive rock music distilled into these two tracks. I love the big epics. I love the big payoffs. I love how enthusiastic and optimistic this all feels. And at the end of the day, that's why I come to music. So those are my 10 albums of part 1 and part 2. Next week, because of course I couldn't have done this without a part 1 and a part 2, I'm going to be looking at connected albums that were released either concurrently or kind of in the same year or in the same gap that are tied either thematically or kind of done in the same sessions. Because I know a lot of people are wondering, well, where's this record or where's that record? How come you didn't talk about this one? Mainly because it wasn't volume 1 and volume 2, but a lot of these albums have that connected tissue. So look out for that going to happen next week, because I couldn't have done this whole 1-2 album review without doing it in 2 parts. So look out for that coming up next week. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. What were your favorite part 1 and part 2 albums? Let me know about those commenting down below. Once again, the caveat has to be the first album has to say volume 1 or part 1 or just 1, and the second one has to have 2. Gotta have those conventions in there. Otherwise, I'll be talking about the other ones next week. So that's where I'm going to leave you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. Be sure to check out my Patreon and my subscriptions down below. And yeah, that's where I'm going to leave you. And until next time, notes out.